Missoula County in western Montana. My name's Todd Cleats. I'm the Missoula City and County Floodplain Administrator. I'm the local guy that people work with whenever they want to build near the rivers or near the floodplains. FEMA, our FEMA representative is Mary Jo Camroot. She'll be speaking second. Mary Jo had contacted me a few weeks back, and she had been contacted from other folks around Montana wanting her to put on a presentation regarding flood insurance, and asked if Missoula would be interested in hosting that and working along with our National Weather Service. Our National Weather Service representative is Ray Nicholas. He's here in town. He's been here for over 20 years, was here for the 96 ice jams and 97 flood event that we had, which was the last flood of significance. From my perspective, from the 100-year floodplain perspective, 97 wasn't a big flood. That was about a 10-year event here on the Clark Fork through the city of Missoula. As the Clark Fork combined with the Bitterroot west of town, then the Clark Fork was about a 25-year event, but we really haven't seen a big flood event since 1908. 1908 was over a 100-year event. We just celebrated the centennial of that a couple years ago down at Caris Park. We haven't had a real big 50-year event on the Clark Fork since 1948, and our last 10-year flood was in 1997. So if you believe in statistics, we're due for something sometime soon. But I'll let Ray take over to talk specifically about what we're seeing here in western Montana and specific to Missoula. Ray.
Thanks, Todd. Hopefully you guys can see the screen okay. I don't know if they can dim the lights or not with the cameras, but I've got a few graphics on here, and I guess if you can't see it too well, hopefully I can explain it. What I'd like to talk about is what our current weather pattern's been, where we might be headed with our weather pattern, and then the flood potential as we look at the snowpack and everything that's involved with that. Well, we got it darker in the back. The front's still a little bit light, but anyway, we'll kind of go through this here, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to interrupt me as we go through this. So the current weather pattern that we've been in is known as a La Nina. These La Nina events are a cooling of the sea surface temperatures out in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, and it's just the opposite of an El Nino event, where you have the warming of the sea surface temperatures. The National Oceanographic Administration has about 70 ocean buoys out in the equatorial Pacific Ocean, and they've been measuring this phenomenon for quite a few years now. What we've done is we've established a mean value of sea surface temperatures, and when we start going below those sea surface temperatures for a 3-month period, then we know something's up, and we start to look into, are we starting to head into one of these phases of either La Nina or El Nino. So we're in this La Nina pattern. It started at the end of last summer, and it continued through the fall and now through this winter. And another measurement that we use out in the Pacific is to capture, where these storms are going to move as the equatorial Pacific Ocean cools, and these weather balloons that we send up from some of the Pacific islands measure how the storms are moving as it comes into the United States and affects other parts of the globe. Now, on these weather balloons, we have a lot of information. We have the temperature, the humidity, wind speeds, and all that information is captured. So what we come up with is what we're looking at here, and that's the effect that it has on the continental United States. What we get typically is a combination of both the polar jet stream and the Pacific jet stream, and that's what's been happening this year across the whole northern tier of the country, as you see snow piling up across most of the northern tier of the country. And that's a typical pattern with these La Ninas. We get into a snowier pattern, especially here in western Montana up in the mountains. Now this year we've had quite a bit down the valleys also, and that's not always the case with La Ninas. Some years we can get some rain, but not typically as much snow in the valleys. So that La Nina pattern is still in place. It's expected to weaken a little bit as we go into the summer months and then dissipate and either stay at a neutral state or go into possibly an El Nino, but right now we can't predict that far what's going to happen with it specifically, except that we do see and expect it to start weakening. Now, as we go through and look at what the forecasts are looking like for this next weekend and going into next week, we're seeing this typical pattern where we're seeing kind of a cooler temperatures here across western Montana. If we look up and see what this darker blue shaded colors are for below normal. So we're kind of in this lighter blue shading, which means we're going to be in these below normal temperatures as we head on through into this weekend into next week. And then similarly with the precipitation, you see this A here, and then you see these shades of green. That means above normal precipitation. And that's typical. Southern part of the country is typically drier in these La Nina events. Now, as we go in through next week into the weather pattern, we're supposed to continue with this, where we're having below normal temperatures and then above normal precipitation. So what that means is we'll continue to get snow into the mountains, continue to add to our snowpack that we have out there. So the weather pattern doesn't seem to be changing, at least for this shorter term. And then as we look at the month of March, we're expecting the same thing, below normal temperatures and above normal precipitation. Now, when we look at that forecast, that doesn't mean that as we go here towards the end of March that we couldn't get some warmer temperatures and dry up a little bit with precipitation. It just means as a composite for the whole month, that's what we're going to see is below normal temperatures and above normal precip. And a lot of that's, a function of what we're seeing right now and then continuing to, as we forecast into next week. Now, the April, May, June time frame, there's still a signal there for below normal temperatures for that overall period. Now, precipitation-wise, as we go into these later spring months, we start to lose this correlation with what La Nina does. La Nina and El Nino also, we seem to have better confidence in its effect on the winter months and the start of the spring months. But as we go into that April, May, June time frame, we start to lose that signal with precipitation. So when we indicate EC there, that's equal chances, which means we could get normal, could get below normal, or we could be right at normal. So flip a coin on that one. So now what I did is I went and looked at the last 40 years of snowpack data here in western Montana. And the reason I picked that 40-year period is because that's when I had the most snowpack data available at my hands to plot information and compare to these La Nina years. So we'll take a look at that data here across western Montana. And what I did is I just plotted these years. So for instance, what we're looking at here is percent of average on this axis here. And we're looking at these years where we had La Ninas back in 1970. And I've got 2 years combined there because the La Nina starts off in that fall, early winter period and then goes into the next year. So for this year we have 2010, 2011, and on these other years, that's what we're looking at. So the correlation that I found was that on these La Nina patterns we have either normal or above normal snowpack. And that's what we're having this year also. And you can see some of the years are higher than others, but it's always been good to us as far as having good snowpack. And that was as of March 1, as far as the values in that graphic. Now, as we head into comparing this to what happens with stream flow, what I found was each of those years where we had the above normal snowpack, we had flooding of some sort in western Montana. Some locations in western Montana had flooding. both in rivers and smaller streams. So as we see each of those years here where we have above normal snowpack flooding on each of those La Nina years. And this year we're at 115% of average. So what does that mean? Flooding.
I can't see the years that lead up to 1997.
Yeah,
Which one is it?
good question. Actually, 1997 was not a La Nina year. That was a neutral year.
You said we had flooding,
We had flooding in 1997.
but what kind of snowpack?
Snowpack was pretty high. It was close to record. And I think I have some slides in here that'll show some of that 97 snowpack.
Do you have a record of 48 snowpack?
1948. I don't have it in this presentation, but there are some years as we go back through in time where we have had some pretty significant snowpacks too. And I'll have some graphics that kind of show the maximums for both the Clark Fork and the Bitterroot as I go through this presentation.
Snowpack records, 1948.
Well, they were taking snow course data back in those years. The network got a lot more dense as we've gone through time here. They got a lot more stations. But yeah, they were still collecting snowpack. They're going out with the old snow course tubes and doing that. And they're still doing that. And that's some of the information that they're out gathering right now. So yeah, that there is that. And then, like you said, 1997 was not a La Nina year. That was a neutral year. And that gave us the highest snowfall in Missoula that we've ever had since our record started in the late 1800s. So, I mean, you can have...
What's it compared
heavy
to
snow.
this year? It's 115%.
Yeah. 97, well, just here in Missoula, we had like 110 inches in Missoula snowfall. This year we've had 61 inches. So, was there another question back here, or? No, okay.
You see that flood events when it snows in the mountains, as far as
Most of it.
snowpack?
The lower elevation snow has an effect also, though, because that feeds into the rivers and streams and then just brings them up so that when you do get the melt from from the higher elevations and middle elevations, you've already got your streams elevated, and then that's just going to add more to that. So it all kind of ties together.
What sort of effect does the moisture content of the snow have to do with the snowpack?
It has a lot to do with it, and that's what the measurements are made off of. Is like this winter we've had, drier snow, and the water equivalent of it hasn't been as great. But the measurements that are made at these snow course sites is in water equivalents, so they're measuring the water content. So here's kind of going back to your question about how we compare. This is the upper Clark Fork River Basin, and this graphic is a little bit confusing, but I'll explain it to you. On the left here, we have the water equivalent in inches, and then here is the timeline. So starting back in December, and then going through time till the end of, or till the first part of June. So what we're looking at is, this is what we currently are at, snowpack-wise, this line. This line up here is the maximum on record. This line down here is the minimum on record, and then this green one is the average line. So you can see we're above average, but we're way below what the maximum was. And that maximum data value changes for each month, just because certain years we get more snow in like December. Like in 1997, we had a whole bunch of snow in December and the first part of January, so that would have been probably the maximum back in this time frame. But as you go through time, there's other years where they got snow later on in the year, and then that created the maximum for that particular time. So we're comparing to that as we go through time here into the spring months. So we are above average right now, and I think I have some specific numbers on that. Over the next slide. And these data numbers are going to be hard for you to see from way back there. But what it's showing is we're 114% of the average for the upper Clark Fork River Basin. Now we've got some snow-till sites that have got more snow than that, like just outside of Missoula here, right up here at Stewart Mountain, which is close to Snowball, we've got 132% of average snowpack. So what that means is, you know, Rattlesnake Creek's going to be flowing pretty good. And then we've got some other small streams that are in Missoula County here that should be flowing at some pretty high levels. We'll have some high water on them. These sites over here in the Blackfoot drainage at 135, 133% of average in the lower section of the Blackfoot. So those feed into, I think, into that Potomac area a little bit. So those streams should be flowing real high. And I think I did a comparison here. Let me just go here. Next slide. Yeah, here's where we wanted to compare snowpack this year, and then I went ahead and put, you know, when we reached flood stage on the Clark Fork on this graph too. So I got a bit on this, but so we're looking at percent of average here, and then we're looking at the years, and I went back to 1996 just to keep us in this time frame of, you know, more recent memory of what's happening. So we're currently at 114% of average. And if we look back at 1997, snowpack in the Clark Fork was 149% of average. So that year that, if most of you folks were here, that was a big flood year. We reached 12.59 feet on the Clark Fork River here in Missoula on that snowpack year. The rest of these years, we never really did reach flood stage. We got pretty close in quite a few of these. And this year, we got to 9.5 feet in 2009. In 2008, we got to 9.5 feet. So through time there, we've gotten close, but we haven't exceeded that flood stage since 97.
What is it now?
What's that?
You said if you got 9.5 feet, or 7, what is it right now? Is it
Oh, what's the reading on the Clark Fork right now? Boy, I don't know what today's reading would be on the Clark Fork. It's pretty low. Yeah, so as we go through the spring months, though, my gut feeling is just looking at this snowpack right here, I think we'll get up there close to the flood stage here in Missoula. Whether we exceed it or not is going to depend on, you know, what happens with our weather as we go through the spring months here, because there's a lot of things that can happen. You know, as we look at some of these years, and if we continue to build snowpack later into the spring months, and with these cooler temperatures holding on, that can increase our percentages compared to average.
You're talking Clark Fork, is this also translated to the
No, I got some information on the Bitterroot too. Yeah. And here's just a look at what I was just mentioning as far as valley precipitation here at Missoula. Precipitation-wise, since October this year, we've had 7.66 inches of water compared to our average of 4.83, which is about 158, 160% of average. And then snowfall-wise, we've had 61.8 inches of snow compared to the normal of 38 inches. And that's just snowfall. And now some of that's melted, and you know, and then we've had some more snow and then melted again. But as far as the overall snow that's occurred here in the valley, that's where we're sitting this year. Now here's a look at the Bitterroot. Now this is this graphic I was showing you on the same graphic on the Clark Fork, where you have water equivalent over here on this axis, and then the time frame going through time. And then we're sitting right at average in the Bitterroot compared to some of these maximums and some of these minimums here in time. Now we'll see on the comparisons here, 102% of average, and then Now we'll find out something else on the Bitterroot. The Bitterroot floods a lot easier than the Clark Fork. We've got a lot of years where we've exceeded the flood stage on the Bitterroot than we have on the Clark Fork. Now, we've had a little more snowpack in the Bitterroot some of these years, but if we look back at 1997, we reached 13.11 feet on the Bitterroot River here in Missoula, at 158% of average snowpack on that year. But we've exceeded flood stage quite a few these years. And look at this one. In 2003, our snowpack was only 87% of average today. But as we went through time, we had a real cold spring all the way into May, kept accumulating snow, accumulating more snow, and it stayed cold all the way into the first part of May, and then it finally warmed up, and it all came off, and we had a flood. So that just shows you, as we go through time here, things can change. And we got pretty decent flood, 12.65 feet back in 2003. So I guess in conclusion on this, I believe we're going to see high water this spring, and as far as how high the flooding gets, that's going to really depend on what our spring weather does. If we mix a good rainstorm in with that could really give us problems. But that's the potential every spring. We could always get into a heavy rain event, and I think especially on the Clark Fork, it seems like some of our bigger floods have been rain events in the spring on the Clark Fork. That can also happen on the Bitterroot too, but it seems like we've had more on the Clark Fork. Yeah.
How's the flood stage calculated? I mean, where do you set a precedent as far as where in Missoula is it measured at?
Well, the flood stages are set at these river gauges. So like the Clark Fork River above Missoula is at the gauge that's in East Missoula. Now, we make a correlation between that point and the river reach as it goes through Missoula. So we correlate what happens in Missoula at certain areas, like when the Clark Fork gets to the flood stage and it goes a little bit above the flood stage, we get flooding down by Tower Street area.
Oh, I guess the reason why I'm asking is because the Stimson Dam isn't taken out, the Milltown Dam isn't taken out. What, is that going to change anything as far as the dam taken into consideration?
Yeah. When Milltown Dam was in place, there was not enough storage in that reservoir to hold back floods. So with it being gone, it doesn't really increase the flood potential. Now, it can change the way erosion rates take place as the water, moves downstream a little bit. But closer to the dam, I would think the erosion would be more significant than as you go downstream.
Because when it was back there behind the dam, it was, even as fast as it was coming over the dam, that was it. That was as fast as it could go, and now it can change as far as speed.
Yeah, the velocities will increase in that area, which, means you'll have changes as far as, the way that the river scours and fills in spots up in that location. But as it makes it down into Missoula and into the areas that flood farther downstream, I don't believe that's a big impact, not having the dam there. Yeah.
You were mentioning the difference between the Bitterroot and Clark Fork. The Bitterroot appears to have more potential flood.
Well, I think it's just that I think there's more, as far as the flood stage that's set there. I think there's more of an effect as far as the Bitterroot spreads out pretty good. Clark Fork's a little more channelized, and I think what's being affected on Bitterroot is just a lot, and then the water spreads out a lot easier on the Bitterroot. And you got folks or roads or whatever that are closer to that floodplain than you do here, say in Missoula, where it's, it's a pretty good size, incised channel, a deeper channel.
When you speak to the upper part, how far does that extend?
That goes all the way up to the Butte area. I mean, yeah, so it's all that water that comes out of the Butte area, and then also includes the Blackfoot drainage. So all that coming in, Rock Creek, all that is the upper Clark Fork.
And the Bitterroot is from here to where?
Bitterroot all the way to the mountains, yeah, Idaho border, yeah. Yeah, so.
You have any more questions for Ray at this point? If you don't, I'd like to give Ray a hand. One thing John had asked about the snowpack records from years and years ago. From the old Missoulian slides that we have, 1908 wasn't a phenomenal snow year, but what we had in 1908 was 30 days of solid rain in May. Every day in May it rained. And the rain was on top of the snow, and that's what caused our big flood in 1908. I'm called everything, Chicken Little to the old man who cried wolf to Noah. Because all I say is someday the flood's going to get here. I don't make predictions, but just use the statistics that we have. Again, we're overdue for a flood. When Ray talks about flood stage, the National Weather Service flood stage is a little bit different than what FEMA has set for our flood stage. Our main flood that we protect development from is a 100-year flood, whereas the flood stage that Ray's talking about, that's usually correlates a little bit less than the 10-year flood event. I think we've had since 97 for FEMA's perspective, we only have one 10-year flood event, but for flood stage since 97, we probably have four or five in your presentation that we've been in flood stage under the National Weather Service perspective. Before I mentioned, we have Mary Jo Cameron from Denver, from the FEMA office. I've known Mary Jo for several years. I have to apologize publicly. Her name is Mary Jo Brady. That's relatively recent. Mary Jo, please.
All right, thank you, Todd.
Let me pull up the presentation here.
Make sure I know how to use this. I do. Thank goodness. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for taking time out of their schedule today to come and listen to us talk about the flooding potential for Missoula County. And I'd like to talk to you in particular about flood insurance and information that I can share about that. Currently, we see an above-average snowpack for the Missoula County area, and flooding concerns could include ice jamming, snow melt analysis, or snow melt flooding, sheet flow flooding, which would be shallow flooding from 1 to 3 feet, or even shallower than that. Basement flooding may occur, some street flooding may occur, and your Clark Fork, the Bitterroot, and the Blackfoot record flood stages typically occur in May and June. This is a slide to show you the disaster declarations that have historically occurred throughout the nation, but in particular in Montana. And we can see Missoula County is just below Lake County, right down here, and there's been very few disasters that have been declared for Missoula County. Historically, out of 13 national declarations, there have been 4 declared for Missoula, and that's throughout the history of our flooding program. And the floods that occurred for Missoula County that resulted in a declaration include 1997, 1996, 1981, and 1974. Disaster assistance, there's 2 types that the president can declare. There's public assistance and there's individual assistance. Public assistance helps the infrastructure for the community, which would include roads and bridges, community-owned facilities, and things like that. Individual assistance would be the assistance that might help you or I. That's called individual assistance. A presidential declaration for individual assistance is required for disaster assistance to be made available to individuals, but there's been very few historically for Missoula County. Historically, only 5 of 11 declarations have shown individual assistance throughout the state. There's actually 13 declarations, but 11 of those are since the inception of the 1968 Flood Act. If you have flood insurance and individual assistance declaration is made, you may be eligible for individual assistance in addition to flood insurance. But what's important to know is that flood insurance, if you have it, does not require a presidential declaration in order to make a claim. So let's talk about flood insurance in a little more detail. The formal definition of the NFIP is the National Flood Insurance Program is shown on the screen, but really it comes down to if you have 2 acres or 2 properties and the water runs across the land. 2 acres can be 2 acres owned by 1 individual or 2 individuals or many individuals, or 2 properties would be mine and yours, or yours and the community's. It would just be 2 different owners. So 2 acres or 2 properties and the water runs across the land. If you have flood insurance, you can make a flood claim, as long as those conditions are met. Floods can happen anywhere, whether you're in or out of the FEMA floodplain. Floods can happen anytime and anywhere. There can be riverine flooding, sheet flow flooding, localized or urban flooding, flash floods, ice jam, ditch overflow, highway, railroad, or levee failure, or overtopping or failure. 19% chance. You have a 19% chance of flooding over the course of a 30-year mortgage if you live in the high-risk zone identified on the FEMA floodplain maps. There's a 25% of our flood claims come from outside the FEMA floodplain. Historically, that number can vary slightly from year to year, but 25% of the flood claims come from outside the FEMA floodplain. Does that mean that the FEMA maps are wrong? Not necessarily. It indicates that you had an actual event that varied differently from the assumptions that we use to project the flood risk on our maps. And again, it could go back to there's a difference in the type of event that occurred. Our maps typically depict riverine flooding, so it wouldn't capture necessarily sheet flow flooding or flash floods or ice jam flooding that might occur. So regardless of source, cause, ownership, or frequency of the event, regardless of source, cause, ownership, or frequency of the event, if you have flood insurance, you can make a flood claim as long as 2 acres or 2 properties and the water runs across the land. As long as those conditions are met, regardless of source, cause, ownership, or frequency of the event, you can make a flood claim if you have flood insurance. So the message here is to protect your home and property with flood insurance, because this is your single largest investment in your lifetime is your home. No federal declaration is required to make a flood claim, as I mentioned earlier. If the Small Business Administration were to come in and provide assistance, whether there was a presidential declaration or not, for a $50,000 loan at 4% interest, your monthly payment would be around $240 a month. If you buy flood insurance for the course of a year, $100,000 in coverage could be as low as $400 a year for coverage. So $100,000 in coverage, $400 a year, or $240 a month for a $50,000 loan over the course of 30 years. So flood insurance has its place, and it's at times a good investment for you. Anyone in a participating community can purchase. In Missoula City and County both participate in the program. And whether you're in or out of the FEMA floodplain, you can purchase flood insurance. If you're out of the FEMA floodplain, meaning you're outside the special flood hazard area, the flood insurance premiums are cheaper than those in the high-risk zone. Property owners, renters, or businesses can purchase flood insurance. We offer 2 types of flood insurance. There's structural insurance, and there's also contents insurance. Flood insurance is not covered by your homeowner's policy. It is not covered by your homeowner's policy. And the policy is good for 1 year. It's prepaid ahead of time. And there's a 30-day wait if you're voluntarily purchasing. Are there any folks here that are required to carry flood insurance? I think there was one person here that indicated that they have mandatory purchase. If you have a federally regulated loan and your structure is identified to be in the FEMA floodplain, then for the life of the loan, you must carry flood insurance, and that would be structural insurance. So for the life of the loan, if you're identified to be in the FEMA floodplain and you have a federally regulated loan, you would be required to carry flood insurance.
But that only covers structure.
The mandatory purchases for structure, contents would be optional. Yes, sir, you have a question.
Mary Jo, would you explain a little bit about what the federally backed loan thing means?
Sure.
How inclusive that would be?
The federally backed, if the loan is federally backed, insured, or regulated, meaning the federal government has touched that loan in some way, then that is a federally regulated loan, and that would require flood insurance. Most loans are federally regulated in some way or federally touched. So what happens during the course of a loan, when you apply for a loan, is that the banks must follow, if you have a federally touched loan, that the money is somehow touched by the federal government. The mortgage company must use the FEMA maps to make a flood zone determination. And if you're close to the line or inside the FEMA floodplain, they're going to call you in which case you would be required to carry flood insurance for the life of the loan. Yes, sir.
Just in case, if I'm reading it from the gentleman's question, flood insurance also does not cover land, bare lands.
Correct, and I'll cover that in a second. Now, if you're interested in learning more about flood insurance, the first place that you would go would be to talk to your homeowner's insurance agent. Although your homeowner's does not cover flood insurance, your homeowner's insurance agent is probably familiar with the program and would be able to give you more information. That would be the first place to go. If your insurance agent is not familiar with the flood insurance program, then I would recommend contacting Todd, and he can give you some more assistance. You're more than welcome to contact myself or Tracy Sears, and our contact information will be at the end of the presentation. Yes, sir.
So is there qualifications your buildings have to meet in order to be covered by this flood insurance? I mean, in other words, you on the spectrum or?
Well, you'll have the insurance agent come out and do an inspection, if you will, in order to rate the policy.
Do they have to meet a certain qualification, certain standard?
Well, there's certain criteria that's used to rate the policy, but there's no qualification other than it's 4 walls and a roof. But we offer insurance for virtually any structure. Yes, ma'am.
The bare land business, if I'm next to a park with landscaping and toys, is that bare land to cover the 2 acres?
Yes, the 2 acres can be open land. If you have to make a flood claim, just like with any insurance policy, you'd want to document with pictures and other whatever documentation you can collect. So it could be over open land, that as long as your property is involved in the flood, then it can be partly open land and it can be partly your land. Yes, sir.
It's like, if there was a flood that covers vehicles and equipment.
No, we don't cover vehicles,
So you would have to get.
just the structure or the contents within the structure.
Explain the difference, I understand structure, when you say contents, what is that?
That's personal property, your couch, your bed, your furniture, things like that. And
That's a separate block.
that's a separate policy, and we'll cover that in a second. Yes, sir.
Just thinking back in '97, there wasn't water flowing across my property, but if you dug down 2 inches, there was a whole water you could have.
Right. Well, groundwater seepage is not covered by our program, nor is it covered by your homeowner's insurance. So the water must run across the land. It can't come up from below. Okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. So let's talk about the different types of insurance coverage. You have building and contents. So building would include your foundation, your utilities that are applied to it. So that would be your mechanical system, your electrical panel, your septic, well, not the septic system. Any materials that are integral to the function of the structure. We have limited basement coverage for the contents that are located there. Your furniture would not be covered if it's located in a basement and you have contents coverage. Let me pause a minute and talk about what the difference is between replacement versus actual cost value. If you underinsure in this program, then you won't get out of the policy what you would expect to get in the event of a claim. If you underinsure, then that item is depreciated, and it's based on age and its lifetime and condition, and other factors come into play. So you want to look at making sure that, especially for single-family homes, that you adequately insure to a replacement cost value policy. How do you know what that replacement cost value policy is? In your insurance policy, it will give you a specific value of what it costs to rebuild that structure. That's not the same as the market value. It will say on the policy, it will say replacement cost value. You must be within 20% of that number in order for that policy to be a replacement cost. So let me give you some examples to help make the relationship there. If you have a $100,000 structure, we only insure the structure, we don't insure the land, we don't insure a fence, we don't insure the property around it, we just insure your structure. And I'll neglect contents in this particular example. You have a $100,000 structure. It costs $120,000 to rebuild that structure, and your insurance policy would state that. 20% of $120,000 is $96,000. So for you to have a replacement cost policy, you would have to have a policy valued, purchased between $96,000 and $120,000 in order to be qualified for replacement cost. Okay? As an example of what happens if you underinsure, there was a policyholder in Colorado Springs that insured their property to $40,000, which I like to joke in Colorado isn't enough to build an outhouse, but clearly underinsured structure. Sustained 24 inches of flood damage in their structure and had a flood claim of, from what I've heard, about $25,000 in damages. They received less than $10,000 because they were underinsured, and that claim had penalties associated with the underinsurance. So it's important to understand what underinsurance would mean in the event of a claim. You would not see the value of the policy. Even if that gentleman had lost the entire structure, he would not have seen $40,000 out of that policy. It's like a brand new car. As soon as you drive it off the lot, it will never see 100%. Underinsurance in this program is the same way. Even in the event of a total loss, you would not see the full value of that claim if you were underinsured. Okay? I know that insurance, I'm not an insurance agent, and insurance can be kind of challenging at times. If you have additional questions, I'll be happy to answer them after the presentation regarding insurance. A separate policy must be written for each structure other than a garage. A garage can be associated with your primary residence if you so choose, but it's limited in value to 10%. We do pay for debris removal as part of our policy, and we will also pay you loss avoidance measures up to $1,000 each for sandbagging and up to $1,000 to relocate your personal property in the event that flooding is imminent. What is imminent flooding? When you have reasonable assurance that you are going to see flood waters. It can't be 2 months ahead of time that you go and move your personal property out of your house. It means that you have reasonable assurance that you are going to see flooding, and you are protecting yourself accordingly with sandbagging and or removal of your personal property. If you have contents coverage, which is optional, and you have a basement, one of the things you would want to do is relocate your personal property, your contents, your furniture, from the basement to a more secure location, perhaps on another floor of your home. Any questions? Yes.
What kind of other structures do you cover? Like, does it have to be a building structure?
No, we can insure many structures as long as they're 4 walls and a roof, essentially. Many structures are insurable. If you have specific questions about a particular type of structure, I'll be happy to visit with you afterwards. But I generally focus my attention on single-family homes because that's predominantly where our policies lie. Uh-oh. It's not
I
working.
do have one question before you go on.
Sure.
Is there a difference between single-family homes and commercial properties?
Yes, and there's a difference in the value of the premium and the value of the policy.
Commercial can be business aspect.
Well, a single-family home can be insured up to $250,000 for structure, and for commercial properties, they can be insured up to $500,000. Does that answer your question? Okay. How else can I answer it? This isn't
What
working.
if you have instructions worth more than the policies?
Then you might want to look at what we call excess coverage, which would be going out to a third party for additional insurance. But the limit of our program is $250 for residential and $500 for commercial. Okay, let's talk about basement coverage. As I mentioned, we have limited coverage in the basement, and this is for building coverage when you have structure coverage. What are some of the things that we cover? Would it be drywall on the walls? We will pay to replace that, and we will hang it, but we will not paint it, and we will not tape it, but we will hang it. Electrical junctions and outlets we will pay for if they're located in the basement. Elevators or fuel tanks are also included if that's pertinent to your property. Furnaces and hot water heaters, heat pumps, insulation, stairways and staircases attached to the building, sump pumps, water softeners. If these items are located in the basement, they are covered as part of the policy. In addition to the items I've just mentioned, there's also water well tanks and pumps, required utilities, and most importantly, your foundation. So essentially, if you have a basement and you have structure or building coverage, we will cover your foundation and your utilities and any other things that are pertinent or critical to the function of that structure. Okay? As I mentioned before, one of the things that the policy will also pay for is cleanup. So if you have to clean up after a flood, make documentation of that effort, and we will pay for that cleanup effort. If you have contents coverage, personal property, the only items, if they're located in a basement, that we cover are air conditioners, clothes washers and dryers, and food freezers and the food that's in them. Those are the only things in a basement that we will cover if you have contents coverage. If you don't have contents coverage, if you choose just to carry structural coverage, if these items are located in the basement, we will not compensate you for them. Although personal property coverage is limited in a basement, building coverage provides the opportunity to protect the integrity of your single largest investment, which is your home. So flood insurance does have its uses. Although it looks like it's limited coverage in the basement, it does provide an important protection of your structure. Let's talk about some of the exclusions that the insurance doesn't cover. Loss of revenue or profits, loss of access to the property, loss of use of the property, living expenses are not covered, landscaping, and fences are not covered as part of this policy, automobiles, livestock, pressure or weight of the ice. What that means is that if you have some ice that's grinding its way past your structure and causes damage, we will not cover that. But if the water enters as a result of that damage, we would cover it. So flood insurance will cover damages of water in liquid form is really what it comes down to. Mold or moisture or mold or mildew damage we do not cover. Underground structures such as wells or septic systems we don't cover. That means that if your well becomes contaminated with floodwaters, we do not pay to re-drill that. If your septic system becomes contaminated, we do not pay to replace that. We just insure the structure. Groundwater seepage is not covered in this program, nor is it covered in your homeowners. The water must damage 2 acres or 2 properties, and the water must run across the land. It cannot come up from below.
Mary Jo?
Yes.
I can't help but address that right now about groundwater seepage. Again, being a local floodplain guy, both our city and county governments are constantly being asked to approve new subdivisions in some of our riverine bottom areas. And one of the things that I've been pressing for over the last several years is to ensure that when we're near the river, that even though the ground of the structure is going to be built on is way up above the 100-year flood, when they put in a full basement, there will likely, in our alluvium sands and gravels in the river bottoms, there will be groundwater that seeps into those homes and causes damage. And again, as Mary Jo just said, either flood insurance or homeowners insurance is going to cover that. So thankfully, our city council has taken those suggestions to heart, and we're not seeing that many new subdivisions with basements going into the river bottoms, but there are a lot of older homes out there that do have this issue, and again, they're not covered by either their homeowners insurance or by FEMA.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Todd. There are essentially three types of flood insurance policies that are written. There's the high-risk area, and that's any zone that begins with an A on the FEMA map, and that would include for Missoula City and County, any zone that begins with A, AE, AH, or AO. On the FEMA maps, the flood hazard zone, the high-risk zone, according to FEMA, is a dark gray shaded area, and mandatory purchase, as I mentioned earlier, may apply for those zones. Then we have the moderate to low-risk areas. It's the shaded or unshaded Zone X. It's the white or light gray areas on the FEMA map. So if you're in a light gray area or a white area on the FEMA map, once you locate where your property is on the FEMA maps, if you are in the white or light gray area, the mandatory purchase does not apply. You are considered to be in the moderate to low risk areas strictly for what our maps represent for flood risk. It does not mean if you are in the white or light gray area that you can't or won't flood. You could flood if you are out there from conditions other than what our program uses to produce the maps that we show the flood risk for. So there are two types of policies for the moderate to low risk. They are called the standard rated policy and the preferred risk policy. I don't know why this isn't working. Sorry. The lowest policy premium that we offer is called the preferred risk policy, and in order to be eligible, you must be in the moderate to low risk zone, and you cannot have any flood loss claims against that policy. Most policies would qualify for the preferred risk as it stands. And let me mention a word about premiums for this area. The rates are standardized across the nation. So if you go to another company, if you get two quotes, one from an insurance agent over here and another insurance agent over there, if you are getting the same estimate, those quotes will be identical. They should be apples to apples. If there's a difference in the quotes that you're receiving between two different insurance companies, it's because there's something different on those quotes that are making the numbers look different. It could be the amount of coverage that you have, it could be the amount of deductible, or it could be the zone rating. But generally, if you're not seeing the same numbers coming across from two individuals or two quotes, that means that there's something different about those quotes that you need to look at more closely. Property owners in the special flood hazard area or the FEMA floodplain, the dark gray shaded area on the FEMA map, are entitled to an automatic 10% premium discount due to Missoula's participation in the community rating system. So you get 10% discount if you're in the FEMA floodplain for those policies. If you are outside the FEMA floodplain, because Missoula does participate in the community rating system, which is a discount program, if you're in the white or light gray area, you get a 5% discount to your premium automatically as a result of the efforts that Todd goes through for managing the floodplain program here in the city and county. Thank you, Todd. All right, let's look at an example of what the premium cost would be for a moderate to low risk premium for a single family home. If you have a $100,000 structure, if you are in the standard policy for $100,000 of structure and $30,000 of contents, your premium would be about $1,000 a year. If you qualify for the preferred risk policy, and most folks should be able to be eligible for that, for $100,000 in structure coverage and $40,000 in contents, your premium would be about $300 a year. If you are eligible for the preferred risk policy and you insure to $250,000 for your structure and $100,000 for contents, then the premium would be about $400 a year. And as I mentioned, a single-family home is limited to coverage of $250,000. If your home is worth more than $250,000, and you're thinking about that replacement cost that I mentioned earlier, then you would insure the structure to $250,000, and you would have no penalty if the structure is actually worth $400,000. That would not be considered underinsured if you insure to the maximum of the program of $250,000. If you have more questions about that, I'll be happy to answer it after the presentation. Let's talk about deductibles for a quick second. The deductibles range between $1,000 and $5,000, and for the loss avoidance measures of sandbagging and relocation of your personal property in the event of imminent flooding threat, then those actions of $1,000 for each of the, up to $1,000 for each of those activities is not subject to the deductible. So you could say that you can see that there is flooding forecasted, or you can see that the flood water is encroaching upon your property and you choose to sandbag or relocate your personal property. You don't have to pay your deductible in order to submit a claim for those actions. In summary, anybody can purchase flood insurance, whether you're in or out of the FEMA floodplain. If you're in, it's a little more expensive than if you're out. There is a 30-day wait if you voluntarily purchase the flood insurance, and during that 30-day wait, you cannot make a claim, and you cannot make a claim based on any damages that occurred during those first 30 days. It's a one-year policy that's prepaid. Your homeowners does not cover flood damages. Claims are not dependent on a presidential declaration. You can make a claim anytime that you have 2 acres or 2 properties and the water runs across the land. If you have flood insurance and you sustain flood damages, as long as the 2 acres, 2 properties, and the water runs across the land, you can make a flood claim for that. If you have questions about flood insurance, then the first place you would want to go to is to talk to your homeowner's insurance agent. Okay. What questions can I answer for you folks? Yes, sir.
Do the 2 acres have to be contiguous?
The flooding, you would want to demonstrate, it's kind of a gray zone, but the answer is generally yes. If you're in doubt as to whether 2 acres have been impacted, the best I can suggest to you is to document with pictures and to submit a claim. And that would be the best answer that I can give you for that. But the 2 acres should be contiguous. But it doesn't have to be a big pond. It could be a narrow ribbon of water that came up and encroached along a length rather than a pond-like action. Any other questions?
Where do you see a map of these lands?
Todd Cleets has the maps in his office, and they're also available online, are they not?
Yep, they're online, and we've got contact information out there. But anybody can call me up, especially if you have your tax records with you. If you have what's called a geocode on the property, it's like a 16-digit number. If you call me up with that number, I can look up for you and give you an answer in about usually less than a minute, unless my computer's down. But we've got those maps online at our county website, and I've got my card information out front that you can call and get that right for you.
Okay. And I have contact information up on the screen. Feel free to contact any one of these individuals, including myself, should you have questions, and we'll be happy to work with you to try and address whatever issues you have. All right?
Any other questions from Mary Jo?
Thank you all for coming. Appreciate the effort to come out on a weekday evening.
And thanks for Mary Jo.
All right? Thank you.
Please stick around for a few more minutes. If anybody has any specific questions, we'll be around for a few minutes as well. Great. Otherwise, again, thanks for coming up.
Well, you got a business starting yourself?